I learned that he had also shown her the photographs in the ones that you saw today, the ones in the lineup.
What? Say that again. Showed her what?
He had shown her the 46 photographs that you saw in the video presentation today. He had paper copies of those photographs in his file. And the way he explained it to me was that when he opened the file to take out the pictures he was going to show her, those pictures were in the same file, and she showed them. And on his own, even though they were the subject of a suppression hearing, and even though, had I thought that there was any possibility that he would have even taken those photographs with him to this interview, I'd have said, don't think about it. He showed her the photographs that were the subject of the suppression hearing.
Would you call that a lineup, a photo lineup at that point?
I don't know what he called it. But what we found out, and this may go to the questions you asked earlier, what he discovered was that she was now referring to the people not as Adam or Brett or Matt, which, by the way, our feeling all along was that those were most likely not only made-up names, but that they probably used those names interchangeably to be more confusing.
Made up by whom?
By the people who were assaulting her. That was the way we're looking at it. In other words, that if you were going to be assaulting somebody in this circumstance, you probably wouldn't call each other by name. And if you used made-up names, you probably wouldn't even necessarily stick with the same one, because the whole idea is to be as confusing as possible about subsequent identification. But at any rate, we learned at this time that she was now referring to the three defendants, not by as the guy who was in front of me or the guy who was behind me or whatever, but by name, which indicated that she had at least seen some coverage of this case. I mean, obviously the defendant's photographs had been displayed on more than one occasion in various media accounts. And so it appeared that she now was referring to these people by name.
Well, yes, anybody who had seen a newspaper after the indictments would have known that, correct?
Yes, sir.
So what did that do to your evaluation as to your chances of getting by a suppression hearing?
I thought that did not help my chances of getting by a suppression hearing in the least. I mean, obviously that's devastating to a suppression hearing.
And
I furnished that information to the defense attorneys immediately.
And without her ID, you had nothing, did you?
That's correct. Because the case against two of the defendants was based entirely on her identification.
And that was on the 21st? That was the Wilson interview?
The interview was on the 21st. I did not discover that those photographs had been shown until whenever, at some point after that, after I had given the additional reports of that interview to the defense attorneys, then I received Mr. Cooney's letter wanting to know what photographs were shown and got that information. I don't have the specific date, but I mean, whatever date that I gave that, I would have written a letter back to Mr. Cooney.
Did you know about the photos that were shown prior to dismissing the rape charges?
Excuse me?
You dismissed the rape charges after the Wilson interview, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Mr. Wilson called me after that interview. It was late in the afternoon, and he indicated to me that he had spoken with Ms. Mangum. Didn't tell me too much about the interview at that time, other than to say that in talking with her, that she was no longer able to say with certainty that one of the items that was, or one of the objects that was forced upon her was a penis. She could not say that a penis was ever inserted into her vagina. And that, of course, is what constitutes the act of rape. And since we had no independent evidence of that act, then we had no evidence that would support that particular offense.
Well, that was a very significant difference, wasn't it? From what you had said before.
Yes, sir, it was a significant difference.
And you knew that if you went to trial on that charge, she would be subject to cross-examination about all of her earlier statements in which she said that, yes, I had been penetrated with a penis, didn't it?
It's my belief that she would have been subject to cross-examination about that in the trial of any of these charges.
Well, up until then, she at least was consistent in saying that she had been violated by a penis, correct?
I'm not sure that she had been asked that since the initial stages. I mean, in other words, it wasn't like
she had been asked that to bring a rape charge, correct?
What I'm saying is, I don't know that she had been asked about that other than at that time. So when you say that she was consistent all along, I mean, all these statements were made in a very short period of time.
Well, and I know I'm jumping ahead, but why did you dismiss the rape charges and not the sexual assault charges?
Because for a sexual assault, you don't have to know what object is inserted. You know, any object that's inserted, for instance, into the anus would be a sexual assault. Any object other than the penis that's inserted into the vagina would be a sexual assault.
I know the law about that, but tell me, well, so at that point, is it fair to say that based upon her statement, you felt that her testimony would be sufficient to proceed to trial on the sexual assault cases, and that was your intention to do so, correct?
I would say my answer to that question would be this. I think that a sexual assault case or a rape case is the only kind of case, probably, that the only witness that you have to have is a prosecuting witness who can say this event took place. And that if you have a credible prosecuting witness to say that it took place, that is enough to get a conviction beyond a reasonable doubt. And if you do not have a credible prosecuting witness with respect to that, then no other amount of evidence is going to get you that far.
What was your assessment of Ms. Mangum's credibility at the time you dismissed the rape charges?
I had no direct assessment of her credibility with respect to anything at that point. I mean, I don't know how to answer your. I didn't think that necessarily meant that the charges couldn't have occurred, but obviously, as was the case with many of these things, the case, the further along that we got, was developing additional problems. And, you know, it seemed to me that the case would likely stand or fall on the basis of what happened at the suppression hearing.
Wasn't it important that you personally interviewed her by the time you decided what charges you were going to go to trial with?
In retrospect, I would say that that would have been a good idea. I'm not sure that it would have resolved the issues specifically in this case. What I would say is this. At the time that we made that decision, all of the people who had spoken with Ms. Mangum were convinced that she was telling the truth, except for Officer Shelton. He was the only one that expressed any concern about that.
What about Investigator Hyman?
Investigator Hyman never expressed any questions to me, and I believe his testimony was that when this first happened, he did believe her, that it was only after he saw an interview that took place at the Attorney General's office after they took over the case that he believed that it might not have happened. In addition to the officers not raising any questions about this, the same nurse also had findings that were consistent with an assault having taken place. There have been other occasions in the past where I have interviewed victims with respect to the charges specifically because there was somebody who had a significant question about some portion of the story. There were no questions presented to me by anyone in this case.